Welcome to Charts Today Asia. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 22nd of October, comes to you from London. We start by looking at the dollar, still holding its bull trend. It is down slightly this morning, and we've seen a slight deterioration in the last few hours, but still bullish on all three time frames. It's not quite bullish in the long-term time frame on the dollar index, but it is starting to look more and more bullish as we push through the cloud. Looking at the euro, we're seeing the euro stronger this morning, that dollar weaker, euro stronger, just starting to look a little bit more bullish on the short-term chart, but still medium-term suppressed against the dollar. The Japanese yen, we're seeing the dollar strong here on all three time frames, and that just highlights the lead indicator really on the dollar, and the dollar looking set to move higher. Sterling sitting at 130.75, bearish against the dollar. We have upside and downside targets. Downside targets are 2 and 3% at the moment, and the trend is down. Just struggling to break medium-term resistance there against the dollar. And looking against the euro, sterling looking weaker again this morning. So, and we do have a downside target some 1.75% lower to 111.40. Looking against the Swiss franc, sterling looking a bit stronger on the as it's rising this morning, but still bearish medium term. Just looking at the Australian dollar, Aussie dollar weakening a little bit here against sterling, so looking a little bit better, but still bearish in the short-term chart. Bitcoin sitting at $6,400 really hasn't done much over the last several weeks, and so at the moment we are short-term bullish, but only just. Markets last week, the S&P ended up closing down on Friday just slightly, and really just shows the seesaw that we've seen. Whipsawing the cloud at the moment, so medium term we're just looking bearish, and that is the big concern. The Nasdaq, similar picture. We are actually bearish below the cloud, lagging line below. We have got downside targets, so it is still a concern. And the Dow actually holding its support level just, so um, a little bit less clear there. And the Russell 2000 index, the broader based market index, is actually looking very bearish now, medium term. We might be finding some long term support here, but smaller cap US stocks have been selling off. The futures, if we look at the S&P future, it's up 0.25% this morning, so we might find some respite at the start of the week. The Nasdaq E-mini up 0.4%, so a bit early in the day to say yet, but it looks like the US market should open higher. The FTSE future also up slightly, although the charts still look pretty bearish, and the DAX future up 0.5%, so it does look like Europe will open higher. The cash market, just looking at the FTSE, this long-term chart starting to look more bearish. Mid caps had a pretty poor week last week, and again looking bearish there as well. And the DAX also bearish on all three time frames now, just starting to come through on that long-term chart, as is the CAC Quarant. So very worried indeed. In Asia, most markets up for the start of the week. We saw the Japanese markets actually up just slightly at 0.13% on the 400 index. The Hang Seng is actually up 2%, looking stronger. And the big one is China up 4%. So really big rises there today, but a lot of work to do to turn this market bullish. So it's still a counter trend move. The Sensex up 0.2%, and the Aussie market up is down 0.5%. Looking at crude oil, we are just sitting above the $80 mark, but still short-term bearish. Downside target $75, and WTI downside target $65. Also looking bearish below the cloud. US nat gas sitting at $3.19. Taking a look at gold, gold holding its strength at 12.26. We're still short-term bullish. We've got upside targets, just holding the gains, but not moving any higher. And looking at silver, we are a similar picture there. US 10-year yield sitting at 3.2%, so just holding on to that bullish trend. 3% really is now, we've said goodbye to sub 3% by the looks of things here. And looking at German bonds, down this morning 0.25% in the bond market. Bond yields in Germany rising, Italy downgraded by Moody's to closer to junk status. Now, all of that data that we're just looking at there on that tab is coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, or if you're a private investor, you can use the same data with Metastock Zenith. Take a look at the Updata website for that. Here we're looking at the stocks, and for my analysis of the stocks, I'm using Yahoo data from Yahoo Finance, and Updata sits on that as well. So just looking at the Asian markets, we see here the Nikkei up about 0.4%. The Hang Seng again looking strong, and the Chinese market looking strong. Even quite strong performances from the markets in other parts of Asia. Here we see Taiwan, the Kospi in Korea looking stronger this morning, but still looking pretty bearish, and the TISEC index also lower, and Jakarta also looking worrying as well, and even New Zealand down 1%. So it's not all markets are up in Asia, it's just the China effect really. We're seeing China doing that counter trend move on the basis that government has said it will support stocks. Quickly looking at the Nasdaq before we look at some of the individual Asian stocks performing. Here we see there were big moves last week. Activision Blizzard had a very bad week, and here we see we just pushed lower below the cloud of the medium-term chart. Starting to see more Nasdaq stocks doing that, and that is an indication the market is starting to sell off. Apple actually held okay on the week. Amazon also holding its bull trend, but starting to come under pressure here on the medium-term chart. This is the relative chart relative to the Dow Jones index, outperforming some 47%. But if we make new lows on Amazon, that's going to activate some downside targets, so we need to watch that. Google still medium-term bearish and really flat performance. It was 15% better than the Dow at one point in the year in June, July, back to parity with the Dow, so it hasn't outperformed the market. Taking a look at Facebook, still looking pretty bearish, and this 150 level pretty critical for Facebook. Quite a big risk that will fall to long-term bearish there. Taking a look at some of the other Nasdaq stocks, Tesla were down on Friday. Still, that 250 level is pretty critical for Tesla. We're sitting at 260 at the moment. Taking another look at Netflix. Netflix were down quite significantly again on Friday, and Nvidia also down. So it was a pretty mixed bag for the week. Nvidia, for the first time in a long time, actually starting to break that medium-term trend, and we've got downside targets here of 30% actually activated on Nvidia. So it may well be the end of the run that we've seen in that amazing performance. The Microsoft chart still looking pretty good, back below the 110 level, but still outperforming the Dow some 23% this year. Taking a quick look at the Aussie market, best performer is Pilbara Minerals, up 5%. That chart actually looking good long term. Medium term, we're still bearish. We've actually underperformed the Dow Jones index some 30% so this year, so not a great looking chart. And the same is true of Western Areas Limited, much the same underperformance. Here we see Focus Group. We talked about Focus last week. Looks like it's making a long-term transition to bullish. Certainly the medium-term chart looking good, and we've got quite good upside targets here on the point and figure charts. Looking at the worst performers in the Aussie market, Flight Centre down 10%, so really big moves there. Very bearish looking chart for the medium term. Long term, not yet quite bearish. Downside targets some 16-17%. So we're really seeing quite a sell-off there. And here are the Aussie underperformers. Taking a look at China, best performers, we've got 3 up 10%. Orient Securities. A lot of these charts looking bearish, of course, and 10% not making any difference to the look of the chart. In this instance, CITIC looking a little bit better. The most interesting thing about the Chinese market is no sells in the top 50. All stocks in the top 50 off. That's very unusual. So it shows just the strength of the market, with the government saying that it would support stocks. In Hong Kong, best performer is Geely, up 8%. China, Mengini Dairy Company up 7%. So we're seeing some quite big moves there as well, and only three stocks down. MTR Corporation actually down and looking bearish on these time frames with really clear downside targets, so not looking good there. The Nifty 50, India Bulls was a poor performer last week. This was in the underperformers most of the week. We've seen big sell-off here each week, and then it's up this morning some 10%, but really that's only undoing a very small part of the sell-off here, underperforming the Dow Jones Index by 42% and 58% of the Dow performance this year. Taking a look at the worst performers, it's petroleum stocks really. So we're seeing here Bharat Petroleum, oil and gas, natural gas corporation. A lot of these stocks bearish on both time frames. Last of all, quick look at Japan, and here we see the Shiseido up 4%. We are seeing some quite good performances in Japan, but again, a lot of these stocks bearish on the medium-term chart. So that's Kawasaki down some 9%, has been an underperformer, but now making new two-year lows. Not good with downside targets. Anyway, that's it for today on Europe. Keep an eye out for on Asia. Keep an eye out for our European and US reports. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.